But I want to ask you about boundaries. Boundaries so important for everybody in life. How did you start establishing boundaries not only with others, but with yourself?
I think what I've learned about boundaries is, number one, understanding them. If you grew up in an environment where having boundaries didn't serve the people around you, whether you grew up in an alcoholic home or maybe a home with people who struggle, as a child, you learn this idea that boundaries are like mean, right? Like that I mean if I set a boundary with you. And so I think for me, I've had to unlearn what it means to make a boundary and reframe it and know that when I'm making a boundary, it's my way of loving myself in a healthy way. And so one thing I struggled with was that I was such a people pleaser that I wouldn't set boundaries, and then the boundaries would get crossed and I would get mad at someone. I learned like, well, that's not really, fair, for lack of a better term, because I never set that boundary. So that person didn't know that they were crossing anything. And so, overcoming people pleasing, it was difficult for me because I had to learn that setting boundaries and then losing someone, it's almost like God's protection, right? Like if I set a boundary and I lose someone, then, that's actually a good thing for me. So just learning to set boundaries and being okay with possibly people not being okay with them. And I think also too, like I had to learn how to set boundaries in a loving and tolerant way. Cause I think, for me growing up, boundaries look like, fuck off. It's like, I'm not going to set it. You're going to pass it. And then I'm going to tell you to fuck off. Like, right. And so I think it's like, for me, just learning how to, in a loving, tolerant way, say like, that's not good for me. I don't agree. So it definitely, for me, setting boundaries started small. And then there were big ones. Like I had to not have contact with certain people in my family for a long time until I had done the internal work to heal, where I could be around them and have those healthy boundaries and know how to walk away. My therapist explained boundaries like a gate, and it's not in the ground. Like you hold the gate, and sometimes you hold the gate up and sometimes you hold it higher and sometimes you put it down, but you set the boundaries, especially with family, how situational. Like I might come over, say to a family member's house who drinks a lot, and that day they maybe aren't drinking. So my boundary might look different that day. But if I go to a family member's house and I can see that there's been active drinking all day and they're not in a good place, well, that boundary is going to look different that day. Yeah. And so I think, that's another thing is like not having necessarily a black and white thinking with boundaries, which I could tend to fall into. It's just understanding like these may change and they may morph, especially as I grow too.
This is the Knockin Doorz Down podcast, featuring celebrities, experts, and everyday people who have overcome adversities, including addiction, mental health, and trauma, to live purposeful lives. And that's what Knockin Doorz Down is all about.